Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Perceptive podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I am Josh Beiser, and my guest tonight is the developer behind the action roguelike The Last Sunshine, which, as of this recording, has recently been re-released as The Last Sunshine Rekindled. And he is on to talk more about the game and about his thoughts on roguelite and roguelike design. So please welcome from Four Eyes Productions, Jonathan White. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks. Doing all right. How you
It,
doing?
I am doing well. We're both kind of in allergy suffering season here, so we'll see how many coughs and sneezes we'll record over the next 40 minutes or so.
Yeah, it was bad a few days ago, but I'm feeling a little better now. But I'm still coughing a little bit. Got my water right here just in case.
Mm-hmm. So, we've been talking about doing a podcast for the last few months. Things kind of got a little bit busy, but it's great to have you on. And for any other indie developers watching this right now, if you'd like to come on and chat about your games for future streams and recorded casts, please reach out. I'm always looking for guests. But since this is your first time on, what I like to always ask our new guests is, could you talk a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and for people listening to us, what is The Last Sunshine?
My name is Jonathan, and I've done some work in some non-notable work in studios. And I work with a team in our spare time. I'm not in a studio right now. I actually work at an airport right now, and we're working on games. This group that I've put together over time, we've become kind of friends over time as we've been developing stuff, and we're trying to become a real studio, whatever that means. As remote as we are, we're in the U.S. and Europe, spread around here and there. And The Last Sunshine is so technically The Last Sunshine is a discontinued game on Steam. And The Last Sunshine is also some Chinese game, which I don't know what anything about, and I'm not saying you should or shouldn't buy it, but it's some other game. It has the exact same name as our first game. And The Last Sunshine was released in late 2016, almost 2017, and in re-released, so to speak, but we built we rebuilt like everything in the game for The Last Sunshine Rekindled, which was released this previous March in 2022, and it has a significantly more robust feature set, including a list of playable stars, a expansive passive tree, lots of ways to add skills and customize your play style with any given star. It has randomized levels, randomized challenges and rewards in the levels, which most of that was not featured in the previous version of the game. But you can't. We just added the old playable version of the game with the new playable version of the game that we just added it as a package thing that's free. If you want to play the old version, you can, but I can't tell you how stable it is, and there's no support plan for it. So, but it's there. People were asking about it, which was weird. This is a weird little phenomenon that happens when you put a game on Steam. There's an old version, or no, when you take a game off Steam, you get bombarded with messages of people asking to play the removed game from Steam, which I had no idea that was a thing, but that's a thing.
Yeah, and it's always I think some of this could be like video game collectors, and I could also
That's
be
what
like
I thought.
people going for there are a lot of achievement hunters I've seen who will go after any game to, you know, get their whatever their Steam score is. At this point, I have over 3,000 games on Steam, so I've given up trying to get every achievement, all the
But there's
games.
no achievements on it, right? It can't be
Yeah,
that. It has to be a collector thing. I
yeah.
have no idea. It totally blindsided our entire group. We're just like, wait, you want the game that's been removed from Steam? Now it was, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. But I guess with the Last Sunshine, as you said, with the original version of Last Sunshine, there's definitely less of kind of the progression or kind of the roguelike elements to it. So with the rekindled version, what kind of inspired you to kind of go the action roguelite route with it?
Um, we thought it would be the short version is going to be a good addition to the game, although it did complicate our scope, which was a good thing in some areas and a bad thing in other areas. and the nature of our systems were such that we could generate appropriate content for the player in a clever way, but we don't try to abuse that. So, for example, so I gave a talk on this recently at the East Coast Game Conference a few weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it's what I call content mileage. And it's what it means is it's the reuse of assets to create game content.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is basically how much can you reuse assets or reuse an enemy with minor tweaks or no tweaks or whatever it is before the player kind of goes, all right, I want to see something different. And I'm getting bored with what I'm seeing. So, repeat your question again. I kind of went off in my mind somewhere.
What kind of led to adopting the roguelite elements or the rekindled version?
Oh, right, yeah. So, on paper, I really like a roguelite kind of thing where you're experiencing certain challenging content, and even though when you lose, you gain something that you then retry the content again with like improved knowledge or new toys or padded stats or whatever it is. So just in principle, that's a generally a good idea.
Yeah, and we kind of saw a lot more of those like roguelike elements over like the last like 6 or 7 years. And it has been, I think, another very interesting way of trying to have that sense of progression, but still have that element of you die, you must restart over, you must go again.
Right. And just to be clear, are you saying roguelite, Lite, or Like?
I've been saying a roguelite, Lite, for
okay.
The Last Sunshine. Because again, for people listening, there's always that great debate over what is a roguelike and what is a roguelite.
So my understanding is that a roguelike, Like, is you have to follow explicit like set of rules that are modeled after the game Rogue, like the classic game Rogue. And it has to be a permadeath where if you die, there is no progression mechanic. And it's like this very hardcore, and there's like a list of rules. That's the main thing though. Whereas Roguelite, like Hades or whatever, you restart and you get like, you're on some pedestal to go a little bit higher and a little bit higher each time you die.
Yeah, and I wrote a lot about that in my book on roguelike design while I was talking about those differences. And yeah, like
is that right? Am I right based on your book?
I think you're close. Like roguelike, because one of the challenges is that roguelike has certainly been adopted by like a lot of other games, like Slay the Spire, like Monster Train. We've seen action roguelikes. So what I've tried to do is I say that for any roguelike that is turn-based, that's in the style of Rogue or NetHack, I call that like a traditional roguelike or kind of like a classic roguelike. And now what I've been using is for like modern examples, I will usually add in the word, action roguelike, deck building roguelike, anything like that. If there is no persistence, that you die, you must restart, brand new run. While a roguelite, of course, has that persistence. So that would be stuff like, again, Your Game, Rogue Legacy. As you said, it's kind of like every time you play, you get a little bit more of a push up that will eventually, at least for most players, will overtake the challenge. And yeah, that debate has been, we can certainly spend like a few hours on that one. I have a panel that we try to do like roguelike specific discussions, and they're dreading when we have that one because of just how much of a debate it is.
What is the debate though? Is it over the terms or how they should be designed? What exactly are the two sides of the debate?
The complexity is that people who play traditional or grew up playing traditional roguelikes, they feel that calling modern games like Spelunky, The Binding of Isaac, and so on a roguelike is kind of diminishing the term. Because there are people who still make traditional roguelikes. That genre has never really gone away.
But isn't that why the term roguelite exists? To differentiate yourself from the rogue Like? That's why we say light instead of like, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then the challenge, of course, that what could be considered a roguelite is still different from a game that has, no persistence whatsoever. So it's just kind of like muddying a term on top of muddying another term that can make it very confusing.
A similar situation with the term Souls-like.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's tossed around so much that I'm not sure what it even means anymore.
Yeah, at some point maybe I'll have to dig into that one if I can ever find the time.
There's a checkpoint in the game. Oh, it's Souls-like. There's a checkpoint.
Yeah.
It's like, wait.
And Metroidvania as well is another popular
there's another one. Yeah, it's like, yeah, and this is kind of like a nature of like categories in general with games. As there's more and more games, so and you blend ideas together, and it's just this never-ending tapestry of tie-dye types of like, it's like where if you look at a tie-dye shirt, where exactly does the color red end, and before it blends into orange or blends into yellow, it's like it's hard to explain exactly where it ends, which tells me it's not about a single term. It's about how much, what percent of the game's properties align with certain groups of terminology. Because you can have like a game that's 80% category X and 15% category Y, and then, I don't know. Anyway,
yeah,
it's interesting though to me.
Yeah, and it's like all these different genre mashups can certainly be their own topic, and it's also, I think, one of the challenges of making a game in this space today. Like, if you try to call yourself a roguelike or a roguelite, you're always going to have people asking, okay, so why are you calling it that? And, if you don't hit, mechanic A, B, and C, then, how dare you? It's not a roguelite, or it's not a roguelike, and so on.
Yeah, I'm sure we violated someone's set of rules somewhere. The basic idea that is why we labeled ourselves a roguelite is because a shmup first. Honestly, I think it's more of I think it's a shmup before roguelite. But the reason why we called it a roguelite was because you're expected to die, and you do gain bonuses of various types after death. Then you're expected to retry. So. That particular loop is what defines it in my mind, at least. Right or wrong, that's how I think about it.
Now, one thing you said a few minutes ago that I thought was interesting was about being able to reuse content in a way to give it like a new lease or keep adding to your game. I think this is one of the major advantages of the whole roguelite genre, and something that I talked heavily about in videos and the books, is that when you play a traditional roguelike or a roguelite, or any of those combinations, you're getting usually like a 30-minute to an hour-long run, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But with how content can be procedurally generated or randomly put around, you can get a completely different hour experience for your next play and your next play. And it doesn't require you to redesign or create completely new assets, completely new levels, if you're just throwing around your content or putting it in a way that is differently presented. And with The Last Sunshine, from what I played of it when we were doing our showcase stream, that you're dealing with very, I guess, quote-unquote, like, simple shapes. You just have spheres. And those...
character, yeah.
Yeah. And you can certainly get a lot of mileage out of having these different corridors, and again, what can show up in each individualized run.
It's less than a sphere, it's literally a circle. But, yeah, so, yes, I follow. Do you have a question?
No, I was just pointing out for people discussing things, or people watching us, yeah.
The audience.
So, one of the things I found interesting with the Last Sunshine, I want to see like your thought process. As you said, it's kind of that combination of a shmup and a roguelite. So, one of the questions that I had for you about The Last Sunshine Rekindled is kind of like that combination of the shmup and the roguelite design. And specifically in the fact that there didn't seem to be like any kind of, I guess, mechanic or ability to dodge that is all based on like you actually moving your sun, your sphere, your circle around. And when we were playing it last night, one of the things that I found was it was quite difficult sometimes to dodge when all of a sudden like 30 spheres come from off screen and you just get pounded. And
Okay.
with a lot of the action roguelikes in particular that we've seen, they oftentimes give you some kind of dodge or iframe associated ability. So, what was the decision with the Last Sunshine to just make it all pure dodge or reflex driven?
Well, you do unlock dodge abilities a little bit later. You don't
Okay.
get it initially. So there's a dash and a
Oh, okay.
blink. And the blink doesn't. You don't get iframes ever.
Hmm.
Um, but you do get a short range teleport.
Okay.
There is a star that you can unlock. Calidus, he actually does get iframes for a second. He has a phase ability and a built-in blink, and he's one of the more popular stars because he's really small and nimble.
Hmm.
But yeah, you can get it. So the question is, so the question's actually a little bit wrong. So we do have it in the game, but yeah, it is challenging, and usually what it comes down to is it's exceedingly rare to get a situation where you can't not take damage. It's a matter. It's just hard to see several seconds into the future as the elements are moving in the screen, and it's all very intense. It's a lot of chaos on screen. Kind of a hallmark of the that kind of game. So
Yeah, so that is, I think, always the challenge of kind of the persistent nature when we talk about roguelite design is how much do you give the player at the start and how much do you kind of have that carrot on the stick for them to go after. Because I've played, and I'm sure for the audience listening to us, that we've seen a lot of roguelikes and roguelites where too much is kind of locked to the persistence, and that initial experience is hurt. And then conversely, you can give the player too much, and they're just completely overwhelmed, and they don't know how to get going. So with The Last Sunshine, I guess, how did you approach the persistent layer? Since, again, that was something that was added in with the Rekindled version.
I think it's a pretty standard method where you unlock things over time and you're choosing what to unlock.
Hmm.
So we have, you find these things called remnants, and once you collect one or more remnants, depending on what the thing is,
Hmm.
it becomes available in the unlock screen. And the persistent currency is cores, and then you unlock things that are like permanent upgrades for your runs, basically. And it's just a matter of making sure that you don't, like you said, dump too much on the player per 10-minute interval, like per block of time. Because I have played those games where you're just like, you go from system to system to system, and you're like, well, what the, like, you don't remember the third system because you're on the seventh system right now. And part of the reason why I chose a shmup to begin with was because the core of a shmup is really, really simple. You're moving a shape on screen, and you're avoiding the other shapes. So there's not like, and so there's no inherent like iframes. You don't have to even have iframes. You don't have to have, um, you don't have to have the systems that we put in there because that by itself, like asteroids or whatever, is inherently interesting. Like there's something about it in our lizard brain that we like. Similar to how like the jump arc feels in a platformer, right? It's like this core part of it that you got to nail. So, yeah, I mean, it's a matter of just making sure. It's easy to lose track of this because when you play your own game a lot, you get bored with it quickly, and so you add more and more and more to like front load, and you're thinking like, well, you gotta add all this stuff, or the player won't be entertained. And you gotta remember that everything they're seeing is brand new. So when they go into a new like a level, and there's 3 new enemy types, and they're seeing 2 bullet types, and they're shooting 2 different attacks, and they're getting used to the controls, and there's props and things can be destroyed, and there's collectibles. That's a lot of information going into your head. You got it takes time to process that, so you got to spread it out. That's what it comes down to. You have to spread it out, kind of have an eye for that sort of thing.
Yep.
We discussed that a lot internally. We like debated about like how much you should front load it, and some of us wanted to go like we got to put more up closer, and I said we got to put more further out because remember you played this 100 times and they've played it 0 times, so it's a big difference.
Yep, and again, as that roguelite nature or just roguelite design in general, you need to have that hook to keep people playing. If they, load it up beat the game one time and go, okay, that's it, I'm done, never going to play it again, that kind of defeats the purpose of the procedural generation, the unlocks, etc. And with The Last Sunshine, I guess just to elaborate for people listening, so in terms of actual unlocks, or I'm sorry, like new elements in the game, so you start with the first star. I think I saw there's 4 additional stars. Is that right?
There's yes, and there's a 5th one as of today. We just
Oh,
released a new one today, as a matter of fact.
nice.
So when this recording goes out, it'll be May 5th. That's whenever it came out. And it is hopefully bug free. So we'll see.
And
so is your question, what can you unlock in the game?
yeah.
Basic drops, and these like health and shield and mana and various blends of those kinds of things. What's called utility skills. So utility skills are abilities that all the stars share. Each star, as it levels up, gains stats, because the stars level up independently, by the way. So when the star levels up, it gains basic stats based on what its starting stats were, and it gains new attack skills that are unique to that star, and it gains new core skills, as we call them. I think we call them star skills, actually. That could be an old name. It's either core skills or star skills, which are unique to that star as well. So when it's all said and done, you have 2 attack skills once the star's level to a certain point. You have 2 core skills, and you have the ability to equip up to 2 utility skills, which are shared among all the stars. Okay. In addition to that, so you unlock the utility skills, and you can unlock the passive tree extension upgrades, which greatly expands the passive tree and unlocks new ways to play as well.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's actually going to be my next question about the passive tree. Because we were playing that one on stream the other night, and
wait, and you can unlock stars. So the stars are also something you can unlock.
Right. And with the passive tree, we were talking about this last night. That it really does remind us of something like Path of Exile, with just that ever expanding amount. So, on that respect, since that was a new system add with Rekindled, how did you and your team approach building the passive tree out in terms of what you want to manipulate, what bonuses you want to attach to it, etc.?
So technically, there was a passive tree in the old version, but it was really small by comparison. So the way we approached it was poorly at first. So we went through several iterations of the passive tree, and some really obvious things in hindsight we didn't do right. But eventually we got to a pretty decent size and decently designed passive tree. I think it's pretty good. It's my first time designing one. And it was interesting. I learned a lot. And the main takeaway is try to keep it simple. This is kind of the rule for anything in life, I feel like. Keep it a little simple. And what was the question?
How did you decide what you wanted to put onto the passive tree in terms of unlocks and, of course, what stats to affect?
So the stats were kind of a no-brainer because we decided on various stats beforehand. Well, it was an iterative process. So obviously we have things like health, and then with health that regenerates, you have health regeneration, you have movement speed, and you have a stat we simply call power, which increases all damage. The more power you have, the more damage anything does that you have. And so we put those into the tree. Then at some point, and I forget when this was, to be honest, we added shield, and as an equivalent to health regeneration, we added shield rating. And it's not the same thing as health regeneration, just to be quirky with it. I didn't want it to be the same. And so the general idea is that shield does not regenerate, which is kind of opposite in a lot of games in hindsight. But it does not regenerate, but it has a higher it tends to have a higher maximum value and a higher effective maximum value, because the shield rating reduces damage the shield would take, whereas health regeneration simply repairs its health, and speeds is kind of this thing by itself. It's there's no equivalent to health regeneration or shield rating for speed. And speed is weird because it's really dependent on the player skill. Because like if you're really good, then a lot of speed is like really really good.
Yep.
But if you're not and you're fast, you just like go to your death faster. So it depends on your play style. But and to account for that, we made stars that are more defensive and tanky, like Titan and so on. So because part of the reason we wanted to kind of like lower the barrier to entry as you unlock more stars and that sort of thing, even though the game is still kind of hard. But as you gain stats, it gets easier. And another thing that I did for the passive tree is to simplify it in my mind. I made some rules, and one of the rules was it has to be symmetrical, because there's this phenomenon that I experience. I think a lot of people do as well. Is when you have too much freedom, you just can't focus on anything, and you go cray cray. So it's like what I did was I said, okay, to try to keep this reasonable, so I can wrap my mind around it, I'm going to do things like make it symmetrical in a certain way, and every color, the nodes are going to have a certain color scheme, and the health nodes are going to be on this quadrant over here, and the shield nodes are over here, and the other nodes are over here. And that helped wrap my mind around a lot of it. And then, long story short, there are specialized nodes that you get that are themed in various ways, and there are ways that the tree connects that you can move around in kind of a circular fashion if you choose. So, yeah, I had to simplify it mentally, because I find myself I have a hard time personally whenever there's too many options, and I just go like, oh my gosh, I kind of freeze up. So, and I did the same thing with enemies too. So back to the content mileage comment briefly, is like, it's like how many tiers of enemies is too many. And so I made a rule, and the rule was 3. And I thought if I go beyond that, it's cheapening the experience for the player. Because I could have had, ward tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But when you see the 7th tier, you're like, all right, you're out of ideas. You know what I mean? Like, stop showing the same enemy with the same more health and more damage. You're out of ideas at this point.
Yeah. And with the whole idea of, choice paralysis, again, as someone with lots of games to play, even just within games in general, I run to that myself. That if you say, okay, choose your starting character, choose 27 starting skills and a starting position, I'm like, just let me choose random. Just, let the game pick it for me. Let me get in, because I'm going to be here all night just trying to pick and choose that.
That's why I can't do character creators.
Oh,
There's too many options. So I just go, like, I'm gonna make this cool character, and I get, and I'm like adjusting the eyebrows. I'm like, what is going on here, man? This is just too much stuff. So I'm like, okay, let's go to the presets and then like choose a hairstyle, and we'll just call it quits.
Yeah,
I'm behind the helmet anyway. What's the point, right?
Yeah, the extent of my character creation is just make sure my character has brown hair and brown eyes. Like, that is it. Like, that's my goal.
That's funny.
Now, one thing that I found interesting when I played the Last Sunshine, I just want to get your thoughts on this, kind of like in terms of like, I guess, like how you play the game or strategies of it, is that since at least the starting character themselves doesn't have an actual dodge, that one of my strategy was I went heavy into speed and power, but then I realized that if I don't have a dodge and bulls are still coming at me, I still need to build health as kind of like that tanking mechanism. So like for yourself and for like people who play tested Last Sunshine Rekindled, I guess, what kind of playstyles did you see evolve over the course of playing the game and mastering it?
There are 2 general tendencies people have. One is they go with health and health regeneration to endure hits, and the more frisky players will try to do speed and power. And once they unlock some of the more nimble stars, that's where they feel like they're at home.
Yeah.
And the other players, when they unlock the tankier stars, they feel more at home. That's the general sense. But there is a fair amount of flexibility with how you can level it, like how you can like modify a star over the course of your run. So while you're like the smallest is Calidus and the biggest is Titan, you're not going to push Titan into Calidus territory or Calidus into Titan territory, but you can wiggle Soul over here or wiggle him over this way. And Vega, there's a bit of flexibility there. It depends on who you're picking. We haven't seen any data or like anecdotal or otherwise, on the new star yet. He's a different thing. His name is Ravager. He's basically like a really powerful nuker. So he has like mana heavy, really powerful moves. Then some of his stat gains kind of, and his DPS without his special moves is a little lower. So we'll see how that works out. But yeah, does that answer your question? What were the general play styles I saw develop? That's basically it. I do think there's been not a whole lot of originality with the utility skills yet. It's hard to keep it all in your head a little bit. I think maybe over time as the meta develops, people will discover more things. I think that like Anchor is like situationally very powerful. It's where you like lock yourself down and get like a big damage boost temporarily, but you can't move as well. Like you're kind of like anchored to a spot. And some other creative things you can do with like barrier, where you can like throw up a barrier on this side and focus this direction against enemies where this is being blocked for you temporarily. Blink's always a classic. You can make clutch plays with Blink and mobility skills. This is why Calidus is so popular, because he's got a built-in Blink and he can phase shift, and you can put Blink on top of that so you can blink twice, and you can just go ham with like speed and just put a bunch of points into like damage and just go really hard with damage. So that's always good.
Yeah, and I think for like myself with my general play style, I would probably gravitate more towards like the dodgy, more speedy character. I think just because I play so many action roguelikes, like Dead Cells and so on, where I'm always used to having, my finger on the dodge button at all times to try and get around a shot. Now, one other thing that I was noticing when I was playing. Oh yeah, before I forget, another question I had for you. In terms of abilities in The Last Sunshine, do you have anything that are like bullet destructors? Like ability that can, wipe, like a smart bomb, or something you can use that will destroy bullets that are coming at the player?
The barrier, but it's just what hits it.
Okay.
So the answer to the question is basically no.
Okay. So, another thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on in terms of mechanics in Rekindled, I found like those like passive like skill modifier abilities, those ones that they seem to be. I'm sorry.
Fusions.
Yeah,
fusions.
Those. Yeah, and I noticed like those are like they seem to be randomly generated or randomly chosen, and I just want to get your thoughts on designing that system for the game.
So, okay, my honest thoughts are we did not do it justice. So in hindsight, with hindsight, what I should have done, what we should have done, but it's mostly my decision because I was the project lead, we shouldn't probably not have added utility skills. Now, when you say that, the player is going to go, "But I like utility skills, don't take it away." But I think it would have been a more tightly designed game had we allocated the time and resources on utility skills into fusions more. Because after all, you are spending a lot of time just shooting like crazy, right? And so you want more freedom over that. And so it's a good addition, but its true form, was not seen like I wanted it to, unless something in the future changes where we get more time to work on it. But yeah, it's randomly generated, and this is to create a certain degree of RNG in your runs, and you can get the run when you get, a lot of good rolls in your favor. And there are various systems in addition to fusions that are randomized intentionally to vary the play sessions.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting about, your thoughts on where that system eventually ended up. And again, it's always difficult when you throw randomized modifiers into games like this. Because again, like with any kind of action-based game, power is usually your primary stat. Like caring about bullet speed or refresh time, or you care about just being able to kill this enemy 10 seconds faster or 30 seconds faster. And it's hard, I think, for players to kind of mix and match with that. And especially when you have, downside, or you have kind of like these side grades where it's like plus 20 damage, but, negative 10% projectile speed or velocity and things like that. I guess what I mean is kind of like, player psychology in terms of like what they want to choose when you give them these different options. Because again, you can have all kinds of randomized choices, but if your game's built around killing enemies or, tanking damage, Like I think they'll tend to gravitate towards that, and they'll kind of ignore the other options.
Yes, so I guess our numbers don't get so high that you're just like, I need more damage, I need more damage, I need more damage. Because I really think, I mean, you're really only getting like, so you start, so a star level 0 starts with 50 power, and every point of power is 1% increased damage, like from 0. So if you have 100 power, you're doing double damage, and when you get to level 100 in a star, you start with 100 power, and then if you put, you know, you might have a total of like 2 to 300 power. I mean, 2 to 250 power if you're going heavy on power in the passive tree. So you're really only gaining like double to triple damage. It's not like you're getting 10x or 1000x damage. And I prefer to keep numbers kind of in a controlled lower. I mean, in hindsight, if I could rebalance the game, I'd probably like even lower them, not power, but like other stats lower to keep it more controlled. So, surprisingly to me, people actually favored a lot of the bullet velocity. I thought they would always take damage, but they don't. I thought people would just see damage and go always damage every time. But yeah, and then some of the enemies in the more advanced parts of the game, they move quickly, so the bullet velocity is actually useful to land, even land the shots. Even though you're dealing less damage per bullet, more bullets are hitting the target, so your actually DPS is a little higher.
Yep, and for people listening to us, another major point is that you do not get any kind of invincibility frames, or there's no like period of invulnerability when you get hit. If 30 bullets run into you, 30 bullets are going to be doing damage. So that's both good against bosses, especially if you have like a very wide shot, but it's also bad for you again if all of a sudden you get like smashed from every single angle.
On the flip side, there are effects that say for each damage instance you take, you gain this other bonus. So that's a core, like that tends to be a core node that you want to pick up for Titan, for example. And let me just speak on that a little bit too. I am not a fan of kind of really arbitrary effects popping in. So classically, you would have invulnerability. You get hit by an enemy, and your character gets bumped back, and you get iframes for a few seconds. And the reason why that exists, presumably, is because if you don't get bumped back, you get like dead. Like you're real quick and you're dead, getting hit by every frame or whatever. And so what I do instead is I set a rule of how often the enemy can damage you, and adjust it with the sense that you're not going to get iframes and you're not going to get bumped back. You have to react to that as a player. Does that make sense? And so.
And also, a point to clarify, with the passive skill tree, do the major nodes change per star, or is that standardized among all the stars in the game?
So the special effects in the like the layout and like what a node would give you, effects in general is the same.
Okay.
Each star's stat has what's called a stat multiplier. So when you're picking your star, it'll say like Vega, health, shield, etc., etc. There's a number that acts as a filter. So anytime you receive a stat from any source in the game, whether it be a passive effect proccing, putting points into the passive tree, picking up a drop that came from an enemy, it's a multiplier for that. So when Titan says Titan gets 1.5 for a health regeneration multiplier, I think there's a number. When you gain 1 health regeneration, you're actually getting 1.5. Does that make sense? Or if you're gaining 10, you're actually getting 15 health regeneration.
All right. And another point about the Last Sunshine Rekindled that we didn't mention yet, in terms of the level designs themselves. So I saw that is a typical run of the game, at least on the late mode. Is that 3 different biomes, or are there more that unlock after that?
There's 3 different biomes, and they're all randomly generated. And then there's a difficulty unlock, which modifies each of those biomes. And you'll see new threats and new enemies.
Okay.
It's very challenging, though.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Is that the dark mode, or is the dark mode its own unique thing? Okay.
Yes, it's dark mode.
Okay. What was, again, like, a part of the challenge of these games is knowing how far you want to go in terms of difficulty and challenge. What was kind of the design behind the dark mode compared to the light mode?
The goal of dark mode is to give veterans a challenge. So like it's a weird and fickle thing. So you have like a spectrum. It's like we're making a hardcore game, therefore only hardcore players can play it. And I'm generally of the opinion that like you can please most people with difficulty. You just have to lower the barrier to entry low enough, but also increase the ceiling high enough. And that's not hard to do. You can always increase numbers, more enemies, more damage, more whatever. If you're more creative, you think of new enemies that give you harder move sets to deal with, or blending things that make it more challenging, different like types of enemies together or whatever. So it's not such a mystery to me to make a game easier or harder.
Mm-hmm.
That's not hard.
Yep.
I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and coming up with interesting ways to raise a challenge. That's always, I think, a more interesting aspect. As, again, as was just saying, let's just give every enemy 50 more points of damage, and let's give them 5,000 more health. Because we've seen games that tend to fall into that trap where,
it's very common.
Yeah, like normal or easy is not really balanced, and then we just try to completely break the balance even more when we go to hard, expert, nightmare, masochism, the difficulty level.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's a pet peeve of mine. This is why I have a talk about it. It's like it's a pet peeve of mine to see the same enemy with more health and damage and literally no other change. It doesn't even look different. At least color your enemy differently, right? Just go in the sprite sheet and just paint it differently. And there's a certain novelty of seeing the same enemy buffed, but only to a certain point. Now it's harder to find that. It's dependent. I go into detail about this in my talk, which we don't have time for that, I don't think. Mm-hmm. The basic idea is that it depends on the types of player, the types of game. What are your fundamentals in combat? Because your tolerance for skeletons in Path of Exile would be much higher than seeing skeletons endlessly in Dark Souls or whatever. So that has to do with the combat fundamentals, in my opinion. But what we did was we did the 3 tiers, like I said, and we did an elite. And the rule for the elite was if we have a tier, so we have like fiend or ward tier 1, 2, 3, and then the elite version of an enemy would have to look and sound different. So we would have like a logical extension of its functions and its attack skills going 1, 2, 3. When we get to the elite version, it would have a different sound. It would have some rules it follow. So like for example, the health for from tier 1 to 2 was double, and then from tier 2 to 3 was doubled again. I believe the jump from tier 3 to elite was 7x of the health. But the rewards would be a lot higher, and they would have different sound effects and different abilities. That was themed loosely with the lower tiers, but it would be more like interesting. And so at that point, I feel like you're running out of goodwill with the player. We shouldn't do 5 tiers. We shouldn't do 11 and a half tiers. It just like make a new enemy at that point. And our enemies are simple enough that it wasn't too hard to make additional enemies, which is a nice thing to have, actually. The enemy is a character. You should treat it as such, right? Enemies have a certain look. They have a certain animation. They have certain sound effects and death. And they sometimes even have dialogue. But even if they don't, they are on some level a character. So don't cheapen the character of your enemy by reusing it with so little care that you're not even changing how it looks. So when you have a certain allocation of stats on an enemy, and if you want to reuse the enemy without changing the looks, don't change the stats. And it's just that the player has ascended beyond that enemy, and that's okay. It's okay to ascend past that enemy because that's a plateau the player has stepped on, so to speak. So, yeah.
And regarding your talk, if it's available online, if you want to send me a link, I'll include that in the show notes when this goes up as well, so people can watch it that way.
Yeah, I have to find that. So ECGC, which is East Coast Game Conference, it was recorded. I'm not sure it's online yet. I checked a couple days ago. Maybe I'll check again.
Mm-hmm. And like, yeah, talking about like the enemy economy and making or enemy variety like that. Again, it's one of those things I think people are very perceptive of. That if level 1 they see this enemy, if on level 50 it's the same exact enemy, if it's level 100 it's the same exact enemy again, they're going to be wondering, how much content did the developer actually put into this game? And I think a lot of that also has to do with the pacing and structure of it as well. That if you only have the content, let's say for a game that's 5 hours long, you shouldn't try and pad that out to try and get to 10 or 20 hours. Because it's better to have, I think, higher quality than more quantity. And I think that's even more salient in today's market than it was maybe 5-7 years ago.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like, don't overstretch it. And, if you need to make your world smaller,
mm-hmm.
your game should feel like it's dense with content.
Mm-hmm.
If it's this big but it feels dense, it feels like it's high quality.
Yeah.
If it's this big and it's the same content, then it's like, well, you're just trying to make this stretch, and it cheapens the experience on various levels.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I noticed when I was playing the game the other night is that you kind of like these like mini bosses. Like, what was the progenitor? There's another one. What was the inspiration to have like mini boss fights in the Last Sunshine?
We wanted like boss-like encounters before the actual boss of a zone, and we threw that into the RNG table basically. And so there's like a random spawns, like, so certain mini bosses will only spawn on zone 1, certain ones may spawn in zone 1 and 2, and then a collection will spawn only zone 2, and then 2 and 3, or however it goes. So and it's just, we also put some like various loot on those enemies based on what difficulty you're in or what zone they're in, and you can get more unlocks that way. So it's just a mini boss. We wanted to show off some more cool things, because like, I also go over this in the talk as well, as I got a little too rigid with the tier system and the enemies, and I applied a similar logic to the bullets of the enemies, and it got a little too rigid. And I had this moment when I was playing Hades, actually, and I got to like the lava level, and like the skeletons or zombie things, they like kind of slam the ground and makes like this energy wave go across the screen. It's like fancy blue, like purple energy wave, and I was like, why don't I have an energy wave that's cool in my game? and our artist Danny was like, yeah, why don't we have an energy wave that's cool in our game? And I was like, I don't know. And I realized I got rigid with like the rules and the logic that I made up, which are good as a starting point, but I was adhering to them too rigidly. Mm-hmm. How many times can I say the word rigid? So it's like, so going forward on our next title, I'm not going to be so rigid with that rule set, but we still are going to see if we can make a lot of interesting content by reusing assets as any smart developer would, and without abusing that that thing.
With like the rigidness of the rules set and stuff along those lines, it's always that challenge, especially with a roguelike or procedurally generated, procedurally driven game, is that you need to have that set of rules. Because if you just go complete chaos, then you end with a game that just feels very, awkward to play. And I've played a lot of roguelikes and roguelites that it just feels like the player loses agency when they try and play their game. Now, with Rekindled, that you start off, again, I think the meta layer, the persistent layer, kind of helps alleviate that. That when you start playing it, you're not really, I think, set or given the ability to say, I'm just going to beat the entire game on my very first run of the game. You just simply don't have the stats or the unlocks. And with, like, setting up the balance or the progression of the game, I guess, in terms of like your playtesters and yourself playing it, how much did like you have to rely on persistent elements versus, say, your own skill? That once you learn this game, you can just say, you know what? I don't need to worry about getting all these unlocks. I'm just good enough to kind of push through it myself.
I mean, most people would unlock a fair amount of the game.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, like they would probably be level 30 or so with a star, a handful of deaths, unlocking a couple of features, and they can maybe beat light. Some people I think did beat light on their first try or nearly their first try. Um, because there's a certain kind of like ebb and flow to how you maneuver, and if you understand, once you master the passive tree, light is not that hard for most people. Dark's another story entirely. The damage output is a lot higher in general, and you deal a lot more dark matter, and dark matter is a kind of bullet type in the game that like absorbs your shots, so you got to position yourself a lot more, and there's more nasty tricks we throw in there. But yeah, I mean, it was um, people seemed generally had to unlock a handful of features before they could beat it if they would get through it.
Hmm. I guess from what I play of the game, I made it to the second biome on my own layer that night. In terms of the actual like length of a playthrough, what's like the average in terms of light mode?
I don't know what I can give you a guess. I don't know what the average is for players.
Mhm.
Probably it's around a couple of hours, I would say, because um, I'd say it's around 2 to hours, maybe 2.5.
Okay.
Depends on what, if you know what you want and you kind of go. So there's certain things where you sit and kind of think, passive tree, should I do this? Should I do that? And when you know what you want, you just go, you just go real fast, and that cuts down on it, and you do less thinking, which might cut out 15 minutes or so,
Hmm.
maybe, I don't know. And then, um, you're the RNG of like teleporting around matters too, because like you get less hub, or they're called cosmic bridges. Sometimes we used to call them hubs, uh, that spawn in the level, and that may affect a few minutes here and there. If you have a high DPS build, you're gonna go through enemies and stuff a lot faster. So there's a few factors involved. It's about 2 hours.
Okay. So I think with that, the final question that I have in terms of the Last Sunshine, then we'll kind of do kind of like wrap ups and also throw over to you if there's anything we missed. I want to touch on the aesthetics and the art of the game because I really did like the look of it. It kind of has that very surrealistic aesthetic too, especially the boss design. I made it to the second biome, so I saw the first two bosses. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about coming up with the aesthetics that you wanted for the game.
I can't talk much about this because I didn't do the art, and our
Mm-hmm.
artist is not present, unfortunately. So Danny, our artist, is good with color. He's good with a lot of abstract shapes and particle effects and that sort of thing. So we just lean on that. And I emphasized there are no recognizable objects at this scale. You're not going to see a person or a cow or a truck or a house. We are like at the ridiculous level of scale, and it's the end of the universe, and it's a fiction, so we can do whatever we want. So
Yeah.
we characterized, the darkness as the concept, and its amalgamations it produces, and so that's why Prince Veracity, the first boss, is this giant mouth with another mouth attached to it, and there's all this stuff. He actually has a mouth. We had a reason for the mouth. He was supposed to have dialogue, and that's why he had a mouth, so he could speak to you. We had to cut some of the features out of the game because we like ran out of time. But yeah, so it's a bit of cosmic horror thrown in there. It's you know um, a lot of things like break apart in interesting ways and good use of color. So we had some like rules, like a lot of the enemies, like red is an enemy color. A lot of enemies have like red cores, and the core of the enemy denotes what color bullets it's going to fire out. You can gauge an enemy's strength that way and that sort of thing. So
Okay.
pretty readable for the most part. I think it's pretty good for our first attempt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our first major attempt. I guess it's not technically our first attempt, but um and the character designs are exceedingly simple, and for the playable characters, I had an artist say he looked at our game and he's just like, "I am so jealous that your characters are literal dots on the screen while I'm like rigging these complex 3D models and stuff." He thought that was pretty charming. So anyway,
All right. So before we kind of get into like wrap up for the cast, is there anything that we didn't touch on regarding the Last Sunshine Rekindled from a design standpoint, a mechanic standpoint, anything at all that you would like to bring up before we begin to wrap things up?
we touched on most everything there is that I would have wanted to say. Um, as a mini postmortem, I would say to anybody that's loosely in our position, making like trying to get your foot in the door in the industry, like we kind of are. We
Mhm.
finally got a game out there that is worth a hoot, and the main takeaway I would say is keep the scope small. So we made some mistakes here. This is a classic issue. Everyone has this problem, it seems like. And I went into the Last Sunshine thinking I got to keep the scope small. And then as we developed systems, I was like, we can do this and we can do that and we can do this. And before we knew it, it was like, oh, we made too much stuff. What are we thinking? So that's one piece of advice I want to just emphasize. And so whatever you think your scope is, just cut it in half, then cut it in half again. Uh, but as far as the game goes, I think we covered it pretty well. You had a lot of good questions, so
Thank you.
yeah.
All right. So with that, I guess for like my final set of questions, I kind of want to talk a little bit about what your future plans are. So, as we said, as of the time we're recording this, that is May 5th, you just released a new update with a new star. Do you have any more plans in terms of, I guess, content related updates for The Last Sunshine Rekindled?
So nothing planned, but I'm not going to say no to that um, because there's a lot of cool stuff that I'd like to do with it. But the reality is this is kind of the reality of indie dev life. But it's not so popular that it makes sense to spend a lot of resources and time on it. That it's possible that may change, but it's unlikely that will change. Having said that, though, I could see us adding some more. We've discussed some mini bosses. We discussed adding a new zone because we have a lot of assets that we didn't use in the game. Actually, like a lot of stuff that we just didn't get to, but we had like a lot. Like we have Zone 4. It's largely complete. We don't have a boss for it, but we could make a Zone 4 under certain criteria being met. Um, and but I could also see us adding another star in the future. And we'll do some balance changes and bug fixes and that sort of stuff. So just the typical stuff that you'd expect. As far as other plans, we're working on a new game, and we don't even have a name for it yet. We're currently calling it Project Light, which is a coincidence that it has to do with. It's not a star game, I swear. But we're going to be working on an action platformer, and I'm not sure I should say a whole lot about it just yet. We'll probably do a reveal in the coming months at some point, showing off our systems. But we're planning way better this time, and we're thinking a lot more about what we want to do, and it should be a tighter, better game overall. We're taking a lot that we learned in the past, and we're also looking for funding. As we talk to people, they said like, yeah, you're viable. Talk to so and so, research this company. So that's totally new to me. I'm not sure what to expect there. None of us do, but that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to make like ourselves like a realized studio. These guys from different parts of the planet, we've been working on this stuff for a while, and we became pretty good buddies over time. Like we're basically friends at this point, to my mind. And which thank God for that, because it is really hard to find people who are serious about making, doing like putting in the time and effort and the sacrifice to get this thing off the ground. But I've been blessed to have a good group. So
nice. And yeah, the challenge again of supporting games like this over the long run, as you said, as I'm sure every developer is listening, is again the financial value versus the amount of work it takes. Because we've seen developers, unfortunately, get into that mindset of, I'm going to keep supporting this game for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and there may not be an audience or enough revenue coming in to sustain that. And
it's not only that; it's also like so. Due to our inexperience, I'm going to be honest here. like there's a certain like amount of inefficiency baked into our tools, which just should not be present nearly as much in the second game, right? Because now we're wiser. But the burnout is real. Like it's something that people don't understand. Is like when because I played this game for like 3 years. You know what I mean? So like I know it like really well, and it's it's not as easy as just saying, "Well, just add another star." It's like you don't know what you're asking psychologically of people, and so we're ready to go on to another thing, and yeah, it's just a real aspect people don't want to talk about. It's like developers aren't robots. You know what I mean? So, and we did the Last Sunshine over 2.5 years. So I kind of threw 3 years right because we played the previous game and we had the previous game too. So 2.5 years at 10 hours a week was our commitment because we have other obligations, right? We're not just doing the Last Sunshine, and we're not on our own feet financially by any at all, which amounts to roughly 8 or 9 months of full time 40-hour a week work. That was 5 people. So it's a pretty good entry because most people don't get their game on Steam at all. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm kind of tooting my own horn now, but those are just some of the numbers that might be interesting to other developers.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think with that we can wrap things up for our chat. Yeah, so I'll probably have a video with talking about the Last Sunshine Rekindled up in the future. I'll only be shouting it out because I did enjoy the game, and it is again kind of aimed for more on the. Here's one final question then. For the game, do you see it from a difficulty standpoint more casual, core, or hardcore for your audience? What kind of audience tended to gravitate? No pun intended, to the Last Sunshine.
I don't know. Because it depends on how you define casual and hardcore. Because when I went to shmup communities, they're really hardcore players, they did not like it because you can't have health and you can't have a pass tree, but they didn't understand it. It's just they jump into they would jump into passive tree and go, I don't understand it. Click, 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 randomly around, and they wouldn't even read anything. And it's they just want to have elaborate bullet patterns that they dodge, and if they get hit once, they're off by a pixel, they die instantly. That's what they want. And I'm all right, this is too removed from what I want to do. On the really casual end, it probably doesn't work either. So it's sort of like a mid-core thing. And so that's where I started, and I was okay, we can make it easier, right? We can have the stat increase. We can have the stars that are a little easier to play for the average player. It's okay if someone just plays light mode and doesn't min-max the game and gets insane and goes in the dark. But we can also add dark mode with new challenges and cleverly reused things to give people, that extra challenge. And people have jumped onto it. There's some pretty nutty people that have beat dark and gone insane on it. So it's pretty cool seeing that sort of thing.
All right, yeah. And again, that's always that challenge of trying to find the market that your game appeals to. I find that interesting that the super hardcore shmup bullet hell people would not respond to it. And there's definitely a conversation about kind of
it wasn't Japanese enough. I didn't have enough anime girls in it. Not unironically, everything they played was really specifically Japanese. And what they say, they said it was oh yeah, it's a Euro shmup. And I never even heard that term before. I was what does that mean? Well, you can you can have an airplane and it has health and you upgrade and stuff. I'm yeah, okay. And that
I have never heard.
Is there a problem with that? I don't understand. So I mean, it's just too niche. It's just too niche. I can't go that far over there. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't make a dent in there. So
I have honestly never heard Euro shmup before.
Yeah, that
is a new one. For people listening to us right now, have you heard that term before? And please let me know. Yeah, and look, there's definitely a conversation about kind of those extremes in terms of the market. I can see similar pushback with fighting games and people who are used to more of the very technical side of playing a fighting game, memorizing all the combos and button abilities. And for me, I just can't get into that. My brain does not memorize button combinations like that. I'll look at, I'm the guy who did look through every inch of your skill tree. I was playing it last okay, where am I going to go on this? Ooh, all this power and speed, I'm going right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a little rule for design and like inputs and stuff like that, which is the see, how does it go? I'm gonna butcher my own rule. It's like the player should be able to do no, now I can't say it right. Like input should be no more complex than it has to be, basically. So like whatever the player wants to do, it should be as easy as possible, except that you don't make decisions for the player. So if there's a 10 like button input to do a move in Street Fighter or whatever, but you could make it one input, like, or two inputs, it should be the two inputs, because all you're doing is you're creating an artificial barrier.
Yep.
But I mean, I'll make the fighting game community upset. And if you can't tell, I'm a Smash Brothers player, so it's like, because you can have a lot of nuance. There's like Smash Brothers has like evolved to the point now where it's like pretty technical with the latest iteration. It's like it's not the same game it was years ago. Anyway, that's another conversation. But yeah, but to your point though, it's like, yeah, I didn't know Euro shmup was a thing, and when you get into the like extremes of things, it gets like really nutty, and it's a dark and dangerous territory that I'm not sure how to navigate. But I prefer the more middle area where you can kind of experiment and not everyone's like upset whenever you like adjust a pixel this way and it's like, oh, the game is unplayable. So I prefer that more experimental middle ground.
All right, so I think with that, let's wrap things up for our chat. Jonathan, it's been great hanging out with you today, and best of luck with the rekindled version of Last Sunshine and your mystery unannounced project just yet. Maybe by the time this cast will go up, you will have a announcement for everyone.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the interview. I think you did a good job. And thanks for having me on.
All right. For people listening to us right now, do you have any social media sites, links, anything like that you would like to promote?
Yeah. So I and we are awful at marketing. So I will link people to our Discord server. I'm going to give you a link here, and in the chat here, and I will also link to the Rekindled page, obviously, which is here, and I guess I guess I should just link everything, shouldn't I? Hold on, other stuff back.
All right, so all the links that Jonathan is promoting, they'll be in the description down below, so be sure to check that out. So my final question for you for tonight is, do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans or any final thoughts on the Last Sunshine you'd like to say?
Yeah, come to our Discord server and tell us your builds. Let me know how you're playing the game. Footage, streams, all that stuff's really welcome. And give some feedback, and I hope you guys hang out and see our next title.
All right, sounds good. So, with that said, we're going to say goodnight here for this week's episode of the Perceptive Podcast. Again, Jonathan, it was a pleasure hanging out with you, and hopefully we'll be able to chat again in the future if you'd like to come back on for your next project.
That'd be cool, yeah. It's a date, baby.
Nice. So, for people watching, thank you so much for listening. Again, you'll find links to everything the Last Sunshine Rekindled related down in the description. If you'd like to follow me, you can find all my Twitter, Discord, Patreon information that is up there. Be sure to join the Discord if you'd like to hang out and talk game design and game dev. And again, if you are a developer working on an upcoming title or recently released and want to chat about it, please reach out. Other than that, check out my books on design, all that great stuff. You'll find links to everything down below. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, everybody, have a great night. Take care.
See you guys.